And let's talk about that right now with NBC News national affairs analyst and partner and chief political columnist at Puck, John Heilemann, also the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Rick Wilson. I'm curious, Rick, as a former Republican and also as a former Republican, also somebody who's like me is probably more conservative on crime than, say, we'll just say Mamdani, perhaps. I think that's safe to say. More conservative on crime. I'm curious, how do you hope Democrats handle this issue in D.C. and crime in general as we move towards two or three very important governor's races in the fall and, of course, the midterms next year that really could not be more important for Democrats?
You know, I think it's important for Democrats not to overreact to the showy parts of this. And I do think, you know, Trump has a sort of fetishization of putting troops in the streets. But I don't think that right now, you know, he's really focused on bringing crime down in D.C. If he was, there wouldn't be troops in Georgetown. They would be in Southeast, where, you know, where most of the crime in D.C. is clustered. But I think Democrats broadly have a lot of opportunities in 2025 and 2026 because there's a certain sense of corruption around Washington right now that affects their lives, that there are people who get away with things in D.C., you know, insider stock trading and Bitcoin grift and all that stuff. I think Democrats can get to the right of Republicans on a lot of the things because Republicans have to be tolerant of the criminality that a lot of folks in this administration display every day.
John Heilemann, I'm curious your thoughts on the best approach. And I'll say, if I were a Democrat running for a House seat and I wanted to talk about this issue, I'd say yes. Listen, if the federal government can get together with the D.C. government in the nation's capital and make it safer, that is a great partnership and a partnership that I've been cheering for a long time. But then I just throw in, but by the way, having National Guard on Wisconsin by the Apple store in Georgetown ain't going to do that. Maybe you want them to go to Southeast, where the residents have been begging for help from law enforcement for a very long time.
You know, Joe, I think it depends on, as to do a lot of things in politics, depends on location. You know, there is, I think, alarm on the part of not just the Democratic base, but on the part of a lot of Democrats throughout the party and people who are just more broadly on Team Democracy, who look at the sequence that we've seen of the federalization of the National Guard in Los Angeles and the deployment of military in L.A. They didn't end up doing very much, but they ended up standing around, et cetera, as Caddy said. But as a precedent and as a paving of the way for things that could be more problematic in the future, that's what people worried about Los Angeles. Now we see it in Washington, D.C., right. And you have Donald Trump talking about doing it in a bunch of other cities. So I think there are a lot of Democrats who are worried about that, right? I think if you are a Democrat, you would be a little bit tone deaf if you were to welcome this move with open arms. Again, depending on where you are in the country. And I think maybe some of the cautions that you'd need to lay out might be a little louder than the version, because it doesn't feel to a lot of people like a partnership. It feels more like a takeover. And I think trying to draw those distinctions while continuing to be tough on crime, you got to try to draw those distinctions in the proper way.
Right. And what I'm saying is, you, as a candidate, say, I would welcome a partnership. I would welcome a partnership between the federal government and the D.C. government. But obviously, when you have Pam Bondi coming in, making pronouncements and taking over the police, that's not a partnership. So I do think it's important, though. And Rick, let's talk about this. I think it's so important that Democrats understand Donald Trump's not going to be on the ballot again. And when Donald Trump's not on the ballot, Republicans do worse. And I made the argument yesterday. You can fight. You know, I thought it was hilarious when Democrats constantly kept fighting Ronald Reagan, even after Ronald Reagan left office. Historians continued fighting Ronald Reagan, even after Ronald Reagan had passed away. He just stayed in their mind, and they never could beat Ronald Reagan. You could say the same thing about Republicans and Barack Obama. Well, here you have Donald Trump. He's not on the ballot in 25, in 26, in 28. And why fight Muhammad Ali if you can go after Chuck Webner, which is like, let's go after Congressman Quimby. He's a bleeder. And say, you Republicans have sat back and allowed this. I mean, it seems to me that's the approach. All politics is local, and don't get distracted with the ground noise of Donald Trump.
Joe, that's a really good point, because Trumpism is hard to scale with individual candidates.
Right.
You know, if an ordinary candidate acts like Donald Trump, people will like call to have them involuntarily committed. They don't want to see that kind of insanity and drama. Even in some of these red districts, they're feeling economic worry and anxiety right now. The Democrats have a big opening on affordability. I think you're seeing it in Virginia with Abby Spanberger right now, running on the cost of living, running on affordability, and running well ahead of her Republican opponent. That's a really good model for 2025 and 26, because that idea that all these people on the Republican side are going to race to be the most Trump candidate, it may help their base. Right. But that is a narrow slice of this electorate right now. And, you know, as you correctly point out, Donald Trump being on the ballot brought out those low propensity 1s and 2s voters. They're not going to be out in the same intensity for him. And if you run on things that matter for your district, I think it's kind of refreshing right now. I think Democrats have a real opportunity in that space.
And I'll tell you what Rick just underlined is so important, John Lemire, is the goal for Democrats should be to get to the affordability issue. The affordability issue. You've got to defuse crime. You've got to defuse the southern border. All of these issues, these wedge issues that Republicans have used to make Democrats one-dimensional, two-dimensional leftist characters, defuse those and run to affordability. And when you do that, right now, those are the areas where Donald Trump and the Republicans are upside down. On inflation, they're in the 30s. On affordability, they're in the 30s. Even on the economy, they're upside down, because what haunted Biden and Harris is now haunting Trump.
Yeah, and we got a bad inflation number yesterday. We went through that data, and there's a suggestion that in the weeks ahead, the impact of some of the president's tariffs are going to be really felt. And I think his poll numbers in the economy could sink further. And to the point, I was talking to a Democratic strategist earlier this week who was actually somewhat skeptical of some of Zohran Mamdani, the New York City mayoral candidate, some of his proposals, but was crystal clear about how good Mamdani's been about talking on affordability, on the crisis of how much things cost, John Heilemann. That does seem like that is a real winning issue. And let's connect it with what we talked about a short time ago in the last hour, which is this belief among some Democrats. They feel pretty good about the House, and there's a growing optimism, still, it's a long shot, they get it, about the Senate as well, because they've been able to recruit some really good candidates in places like Ohio and North Carolina. There's hopes, longer shots, like Maine and Texas and Alaska, even Iowa. Combining good candidates with a message on affordability, is there at least a bank shot chance of the Senate there, too?
Oh, there's definitely a bank shot chance, John. I think it's. I think what a lot of Democrats are seeing is they're happy with the candidate recruitment that you pointed to, but they're also and Rick can speak to this. You know, we're pretty far out, right? We're still more than a year away from the midterms, but you can be with the way that the economic numbers are going right now, and the policies that Trump is stubbornly adhering to, which are not going to solve that problem. If anything, they're going to exacerbate the problems related to the potential for stagflation. The consultant class, the analyst class, the Democratic political operative class, so you're starting to feel the first kind of hints of a potential wave. And in midterm elections, we have seen this over and over again. We've had a bunch of wave elections in successive midterms, and they've usually been against the party that's been in power in the White House. So when you start to feel the wave, the swell that's going to turn into the wave, you look at that, you look at some of the candidate recruitments, and then you look at some of those facts on the ground, and you think, hey, this map is bad for us, no doubt about it. But in a wave election, the Senate it will never be easy for Democrats to take, but the Senate's not out of reach at all if all of those circumstances all come together.
Well, and of course, Rick, we've seen in wave elections, you never know when a wave election's coming and when it's not coming. A lot of people thought there was going to be a wave election in '98. It turned out being just the opposite and cost Newt Gingrich his speakership. But you do start looking at, early races in Iowa, early races in red states that we saw at the beginning of this year. We saw the Wisconsin Supreme Court race where Elon Musk just pumped millions and millions of dollars into that race, and that went deep blue. We're going to be looking at Virginia, and we're going to be looking at the New Jersey races this year and how they break. If those break in the right directions, then yes, I think a lot of Democrats are going to start getting excited about the possibility of at least being competitive in the Senate. And they're looking right now, again, they're looking at Maine. They're looking at the possibility of North Carolina, where Roy Cooper, a popular governor, is stepping in and is ahead in the polls. Possibility of Ohio, where Sherrod Brown's back. You also, of course, have Alaska. But also Iowa. Not sure if Joni Ernst is going to run again. But if she does run again, I'm sure she's not going to like the 30-second commercials that a lot of people will be putting out on them. So is there an outside chance of Democrats taking the Senate back? Or do you think if it's a wave election, it's within reach?
It is a bank shot. If it is a wave election, again, if you squint, you can see it in a wave election. I think Maine is more vulnerable than people think. I think North Carolina is looking very good for Democrats. And I think as these other states open up, we'll see if the economy's in the right frame and the overall political wave starts to build. These do come into reach. It's going to be tough. I mean, I'd focus first on the House, but I would not give up on the Senate at all.
Co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Rick Wilson. Rick, good to see you this morning. Thank you for joining us.